Good evening. This is Pastor Barbara again, Preacher with Parrots, and it is still the 8th of April of 2015. We have barely started the divided kingdom. We have the divided kingdom because of Solomon's sin. God told Israel a long time ago, if you do what I tell you, you follow me, I will bless you. Things will go well for you. If you don't obey me, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to let your enemies do that. And hopefully, you will come back and serve me again. And if you do obey me again and serve me again, I'll be able to bless you again. So, see, while David sinned, David loved God. He repented of his sin. He served God all of his life. Because of his sin, he didn't get to build the temple. But his son did. His son was the smartest man there was. Turned out to be one of the dumbest. God told him in advance, all the way through the Old Testament, separate yourself from other nations. Not because you're better than them, but because they serve other gods. And when you get to hanging out with them and get real close with them, they're going to pull you over to serving their gods. And that's what happened with the smartest man that there ever was. His wives were from other nations. They served other gods, and they pulled him over, and pretty soon he was serving other gods. We didn't have mention of too many prophets yet. By the way, I'm getting ready to make a big thing for my wall. I don't know what my living room's going to look like. It doesn't really look like a living room. It looks like partly a recording studio, partly a music room, partly, I don't know, bird room. I was teaching a class in the Old Testament at Latin American Bible Institute, I think in the 80s, maybe the 90s. And I'm very into chronology. I wrote a book in I think it's 72 when it was finally published in Mexico, on the chronology of the Old Testament. Everything in the order in which it happened. And the general superintendent of the denomination I belonged to in Mexico had asked me to teach in one of their Bible colleges, and he encouraged me to teach the students not only about the history, but where the prophets came into the history. And of course, if you're going to study Isaiah, all you're going to study is about the prophet Isaiah. And if you're going to study about the kings, and that you're going to study that during the history. And he encouraged me to get it all together so we could see why the prophets were saying what they were saying, what was going on in the world at the time. And so while I was teaching almost, so many different classes in the Old Testament, as I prepared for each lesson, I just wrote them into a book. But the idea didn't occur to me until I was already 3 or 4 weeks into the semester. So when I finished, I went back to our general headquarters in Mexico City and finished the book there. Well, what prophets have we had so far? Well, the first one was Samuel. He lived a long time. Remember the little boy that his mama couldn't have a baby? And she said, I'll give you to God. If you just let me have a baby. And he was a little boy, and she sent him to the temple to see what use this little boy could be to the high priest, who was in his 90s, almost blind, wasn't serving God. His kids weren't serving God. And one night God talked to him and he said, Samuel. Samuel went to the high priest and says, yeah. The high priest said, it wasn't me. You hear that voice again, you say, yes, Lord, your servant is prepared to do whatever. Tell me what to do and I'll do it. That little boy was the first prophet. He was the prophet who anointed the first king. By the time David was king, we had another prophet by the name of Nathan. And Nathan got on David when David sinned. And Gad became the next prophet. But remember, when it looked like David was so old he wasn't going to get around to saying which of his kids was going to be king, and Nathan, even though he was a prophet, older than me, says, I got to go back, talk to Bathsheba, got that taken care of. That's all we hear about prophets until this prophet comes to the king's servant. And he said, instead of the king's son being king, well, actually, he took a garment and he divided it up. He cut 12 different pieces. There were 12 tribes of Israel, right? He held up 10 pieces. He said, these 10 will be governed, these 10 tribes that these 12 pieces of the garment represent, will not be governed by the king's son. They will be governed by you, the king's servant. And he took off. He was, kings got their positions by getting rid of the competition, even if the competition was their own flesh and blood or their own sibling. So he took off. The other 2 tribes would be in the south. You remember we've talked a lot about what a remnant is. And I guess because I'm a woman and because when I was younger I did a lot of sewing, especially when Rosa and I traveled as evangelists, I made her clothes so that we dressed alike. We were in areas of a lot of discrimination, and we were from different cultures. We spoke different first languages, so we had to do everything we could to help people understand that we were equal. And so I did a lot of sewing, and I used a lot of remnants. A remnant, for people who sew, is the little bit of material that's left on the bolt after most of it's been sewed. But a remnant is a little piece of anything that was big. And God has always said in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, He will have a remnant. God doesn't need the United Nations to do His bidding. Hi, Reggie. I haven't seen you for a long time. Oh, you were the guest? Well, then who is 86? Well, anyway, I'll chat with you as soon as, at the moment, I'm multitasking, and I'm also making a video for YouTube. And as soon as that's retro. Well, I've been sending you mail because you're on my list. Well, now I know who's sitting in my classroom, who's joining me here in Lake Arrowhead, California. So I'll chat with you guys. I'm so glad that you're here and to see you. It's good to see some of you. I miss you guys when I don't see you, and I hope you miss being here too. Anyway, God doesn't need the United Nations to help him do in the world what he wants the world to do. All he needs is a few servants, a few prophets, a couple of good preachers, people that will listen to these preachers, that will read the Bible, do what it says. It's just that simple. So we're back to remnant. 10 tribes, 2 tribes down here. These 2 tribes are the remnant. It had already been prophesied, and would be prophesied again, that Messiah would come from Bethlehem of Judea. And that's in the area of Benjamin, those 2 tribes in the south. So now let's get on. Where we ended this last time, and let me check on the time, because I don't want to go all that long. And I want to visit with some of you. Okay, we have that Rehoboam is Solomon's son, and he's going to be king over these 2 little tribes, but important ones. 2 little tribes in the south. They're going to be referred to as the southern part of the nation. They'll be referred to sometimes as Judah, because Judah was their capital, or the southern nations. The others will be referred to as the north. They'll be referred to sometimes as Samaria, because that's going to be their capital. And what we know ahead of time is that this big kingdom of 10 tribes, their kings are never going to serve God. They've even got their own prophets. But the kings tell the prophets, this is what I want you to prophesy. Yeah, that's like the government's going to tell. They tried it in Texas. Was it Houston or San Antonio? I think it was Houston, where the mayor wanted all the preachers to turn in what they were going to preach on. That was about, what, 4, 5, 6 months ago? Yeah, like, we're going to let the government tell us what to preach, right? But Rehoboam, Solomon's son, true king, he goes up to the old men and he says, what kind of king was my father? What would you like me to be like? And they said to him, and Jeroboam came to the congregation of Israel. Thy father made our yoke very grievous. Yeah, your dad was hard on us. You know what the yoke is? The yoke holds 2 animals' heads together so that they work better when they're put in the yoke. It said, your father made our yoke very grievous. And he said unto them, they said, You make things easier for us, and we'll serve you. And he said unto them, he departed. And he talked with the old man. And they said, if you be kind to us, we'll be your servants forever. But he didn't do what they said. And that we had last week. And then he talked to the young men. And then he went back to them and he said, yeah, my father punished you okay. He said, I'm going to chastise you with scorpions. I'm going to really make your life miserable. Well, now that's Rehoboam and that's Judah. 2 tribes. Now at the same time, on another network, in the 10 northern tribes, we got the servant Jeroboam. And let me read a little of where we finished last week. Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam to see him become king. So the king hearkened not unto the people, for the cause was of God, that the Lord might perform the word that he spoke by the hand of Ahijah. Ahijah was the name of that prophet that said 10 tribes are going to the north and 2 are going to the south. When all Israel saw the king would not hearken to them, they answered the king and said, what portion have we with David? Those 10 they didn't have their ruler yet. They didn't have their king yet. They came and they watched the king from the south become king. And then they saw how mean he was becoming, and what do we want to have to do with him? But as for the children of Judah, Rehoboam reigned over them. And Israel, the 10 in the north, they rebelled against the house of David unto this day. This was written, it doesn't mean until today, although it may or may not be true. But it meant until the day that this was written in the Old Testament before Christ. So now Jeroboam, we're in 1 Kings, because all of this is in 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles. Jeroboam is going to become king over the 10 tribes in the north. Listen to this. Then Jeroboam, king of the north, king's servant, built Shechem in Mount Ephraim, and he dwelt there, and he went out from there, and he built Penuel. And Jeroboam said in his heart, now shall the kingdom return to the house of David. If this people go up to sacrifice in the house of the Lord in Jerusalem, let the heart of this people turn again to their Lord, even to Rehoboam of Judah, and they'll kill me. Because we got a problem. The temple is in the south. We're all Jews. The people from these 10 tribes are going to go down to the temple. They're going to get down there. They're going to like it. And then they're going to say, what do we need a king? They didn't realize the prophet already said it. That's the way it was going to be. And he sent, well, let me back up. If this people go up to sacrifice in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, And the heart of the people again will return to their Lord, even unto Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they shall kill me, and go again to Rehoboam, king of Judah. Whereupon the king took counsel, and he made 2 calves of gold. We've had calves of gold in the Bible before. Remember when Moses was up on the mountain and they talked the high priest, his brother Aaron, into making some kind of a god for them to worship? I mean, forget that Moses is up on the mountain communing and getting the 10 Commandments and the rest of the law from the one true God. Nope, they want one they can see. And remember, his brother made a golden calf and they were all worshiping it. So this king makes 2 calves of gold, and he said to them, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt." Think about the true God, the one that brought you out of Egypt. And he set one of these golden calves in Dan. You've heard the saying, from Dan to Beersheba. That's like saying from Los Angeles to Maine. It's from one extreme of the country to the other. Dan is in the northernmost part. Dan is where he puts one of them. And this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one to Dan. And he made a house of high places, and he made priests of the lowest of the people, which were not the sons of Levi. Here we got a problem. Priests have to be from the tribe of Levi. The priests have to be from the tribe of Levi. They have to be from the family of Aaron, Moses' brother. But they were in the south. So he builds them a golden calf to go serve. And as long as he's going to make a religion, well, hey, he might as well have priests. But they're not going to be priests of God. He picks people who aren't from the right tribe because they're not in his territory. We're right now about 1,000 years before Christ. In the beginning of the program, when I gave you a general idea of a timeline from Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden to Abraham, was 2,000 years. Now, another 1,000 has gone by. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they go into Egypt. They become a nation. Moses brings them out. They travel in the wilderness. Joshua takes them into the land. That much time has gone, another 1,000 years have gone by. We are pretty close now to another 1,000 years before Christ. From Garden of Eden to Christ is 4,000 years. From Christ to 15 years ago was another 1,000. So now, Jeroboam ordained a feast. Oh, sure, we've got to have feast days, right? We've got to be just like the real thing. We've got to be like the real religion. So we got to have feast days. And he ordained a feast the 8th month, the 15th day, unto the feast that is in Judah. And he offered upon the altar, so did he in Bethel, sacrificing the calves that he had made. sacrificing onto the calves, going to these golden calves and making sacrifices. He placed in Bethel the priests of the high places, and he offered upon the altar which he made in Bethel the 15th day of the 8th month, and he ordained a feast unto the children of Israel. Israel, top 10. Judah, bottom 2. Now we're going to jump over. This story hasn't quite ended, but we're going to jump over to see at this very moment that Jeroboam is doing this. What is Rehoboam doing in the south? Well, Rehoboam, son of Solomon, was 40 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 17 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Naamah of the Ammonites. So Rehoboam strengthened himself in Jerusalem, and he reigned he was one of 40 years old. He was 40 years old when he began to reign. Now see, Solomon was 12. Solomon was 12, and he reigned for 40 years. He died very young. He wasn't old enough to collect Social Security. He was chosen out of all the tribes of Israel to put his name there. Now, when Rehoboam, in the south, the king of the south, with the tribe, he got all of Judah and all of Benjamin together, those two tribes. There was 180,000, 20, 40, 60, 80. 180,000 chosen men were warriors. This is in the south. King's got 180,000 in his army to fight against the 10 tribes in the north. This is going on while up in the north this guy is making his 2 calves, and he's got his fake priests for these calves. Here in the south, Rehoboam, Solomon's son, he's got this big army. But the word of the Lord came on to Shemaiah. Who's he? He's that prophet we're starting to hear from. The word of the Lord comes to this prophet and says to the prophet, "Speak unto Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, king of Judah, and say unto the house of Judah and Benjamin, and to the remnant of the people." You're going to hear remnant for the rest of the Bible. There's only a remnant going to heaven. Remnant is a small part of a big whole thing. But with God, all you need is a remnant. You just need a little bit of something. And he said, "Thus saith the Lord, do not go up, don't fight your brethren, the children of Israel." Yeah, there are different 12 tribes, but they were all once 12 tribes of Israel. They're your brothers. "Return every man to his house, for this thing is from me." God said, somebody didn't come down and divide you up. It was my idea. This that's going on, that's from me. See, it was the prophet that originally went to Jeroboam and told him what the plan was. It was God's plan. It wasn't something that the 12 tribes came up with. They hearkened therefore to the word of the Lord, and they returned to depart according to the word of the Lord. So they said, okay, God, you don't want us to fight them? We won't fight them. And when Rehoboam was come to Jerusalem, he gathered. Jerusalem is a city in Judah, which was a tribe, like a state. He gathered in the house of Judah and Benjamin 180,000, that's 180,000 chosen men. We're going to get that same story again in Chronicles that we just got from the Kings. Speak to Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, king of Judah, and to all the children of Israel, and say, Thus saith the Lord, you shall not go up nor fight against your brethren. Return every man to his house, for this thing is done of me. And they obeyed. And the words of the Lord they returned from going against to Jeroboam. Let me explain something. In the very beginning of the Bible, we got Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That's called the Pentateuch. You know, pentagram is a 5-sided figure. Pentecost was 50 days after another feast of Passover. And penta means 5. He says, and I have lost my place, just a moment. I was talking about Pentateuch. Pentateuch is the first 5 books of the Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. That's a history. Deuteronomy is kind of like a replay of these. So I have sermons that I preach in the book of Numbers, and they're also in Chronicles. In Deuteronomy. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. This is it. And this is a replay of this. So you have in Deuteronomy the same things you have here. And if you're going to study them, you're going to study from Genesis and Deuteronomy, or Exodus and Deuteronomy, or Leviticus and Deuteronomy, but it's all in capsule form in Deuteronomy. Well, in the divided in Kings, you got First Kings is about Saul. Then you got separately David. So you've got in First Kings and Second Chronicles the same material. So there'll be occasions when I read almost the exact same thing. But it works out just like in the Pentateuch. You've got 4 Bibles, and then you've got one that's kind of a recapitulation of those. And that's why we have the same thing with the Gospels. When we read something that Jesus did, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, sometimes all 4 wrote the same thing. Sometimes only 3 mentioned it. Occasionally, only 1 would think it was important and needed to be mentioned. But you would have 4 writing all about the same thing. Sometimes the words are slightly different but mean the same thing, and sometimes they're the exact same words. Okay. And the priests and the Levites that were in Israel resorted to him out of their coasts. For the Levites left their suburbs. We got a problem here. The Levites didn't have land. You don't need a land if you're a preacher. It's not so much anymore, but it used to be. It still is in the Catholic Church. You go by the Catholic Church, somewhere within a few feet of the church is a rectory where the priests live. In the Protestant churches, they've got different names. Some of them were called manse, M-A-N-S-E. That may have been the Methodists, I'm not sure. Some are called pastors' houses. There are other names, but they figured a preacher's job is in the church. Now, a lot of preachers nowadays have a regular job, plus they pastor a church. But in the old days, when I was a kid growing up, all pastors, that's all they did. They didn't need 50 acres. They didn't need 5 acres. Their work was in the church. If they'd had a bunch of land, they would have had to take some of their time from the church and spend it taking care of the house and the land. All they needed was a house and maybe a little lot or so around it. So when land was given out, tribe of Levi, they were the priests. They were the doorkeepers. They received the sacrifices. They mopped the floor. They cooked the showbread. They put oil into the menorah to light it. Everything that was done in the temple or the tabernacle was done by the tribe. Not all were priests, but they were all in the tribe of Levi. Half of them were on duty in the temple, and half of them were off duty. Kind of like the firemen. 2 days on, 2 days off, only it was more than 2 days. So Levites were scattered through the whole 12 tribes, but now we got 10 and 2. The priests left their suburbs and their possessions, and they came to Judah. Why? Because the temple is in Judah, and now we've got 10 tribes plus 2 tribes. For Jeroboam and his sons had cast them off from executing the priest's office unto the Lord. Well, they weren't in his territory. And after them, out of all of the tribes of Israel, such as set their hearts to seek the Lord, God of Israel, came to Jerusalem to sacrifice unto the Lord, the God of their forefathers. So they strengthened the kingdom of Judah and made Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, strong. For 3 years, they walked in the way of David and Solomon. I'm going to end right there. And when I start, let me go back before I end and bring the northern tribes now. At the same time period. Behold, there came a man of God of Judah, unto Bethel. Then Jeroboam stood by the altar to burn incense. Jeroboam was going to burn incense to his golden calf. I mean, he doesn't have a temple, right? And he cried against the altar in the word of the Lord and said, O altar, altar, thus saith the Lord, behold, a child shall be born unto the house of David, Josiah by name. He's one of the good kings we're going to have. And upon thee shall he offer the priests of the high places that burn incense unto thee, and men's bones shall be burnt upon thee. Remember, he's talking to the altar. He's saying, oh, altar, altar. There's going to be a child in the house of David. And men's bones are going to be burnt upon you, O altar. I mean, he's talking to an altar, right? And he gave a sign to the same day, saying, this is a sign which the Lord hath spoken. Behold, the altar shall be ripped up, and the ashes that are laid upon it shall be poured out. Okay? He's talking to this altar. You're going to be ripped up, and the ashes that are going to come, because sacrifices are burned on altars, they're going to be poured out. And it shall come to pass, when King Jeroboam heard this saying of the man of God, he cried against the altar in Bethel, and he put forth his hand from the altar, saying, lay hold on him. And his hand which he put forth against him dried up. Remember that happened one time to Moses' sister. She got leprosy in her hand. And the hand that he put forth dried up, so that he wasn't able to bring his hand back. The altar also was rent, came apart. And the ashes poured out from the altar according to the sign of the man of God had given. And the king answered and said unto the man of God, entreat thee now the face of the Lord, and pray for me. Entreat means to pray. So he's saying two different ways. Pray for me, that my hand will be restored again, because his hand is still out here. And the man of God besought, begged the Lord, and his hand became as it was before. And the king said to the man of God, come home with me, refresh yourself, and I'll give thee a reward. And the man of God said unto the king, if you would give me half your house, I will not go in with thee. I won't eat, I won't drink bread, I won't drink water. For it was so charged me by the word of the Lord, saying, the Lord had told the man of God, don't eat bread, drink water, nor turn again the same way thou camest. You just turn right around and you go right where you came from. And he returned not the way by Bethel. So that ends, that's where we end in the northern part. And in the southern part, we end where Jeroboam and the southern kingdom, for a period of 3 years, they walked the way that David and Solomon did when Solomon first began to rule. Well, this is the first time I've ever, parsonage, thank you, Casa Pastoral. Because the parson, in many places, the preacher was known as the parson. So the parsonage is a very good, and it's the name that most of them use, by the way. We're going to chat a little bit. I'm going to close this portion of our video. So until the next video, God bless you.